You know, you've heard me say this many times. It's not my phrase, but it's one that's been around for years from different sources. And it's that hurting people hurt people. And I said this to the fire breather the last time I saw the fire breather in person, right? At my own, in my own setting. I said this to the fire breather because the fire breather was struggling and having a really hard time in their life. So I said it about somebody else, but now I'm saying it about that fire breather. And I know, again, because it's a mirror, I've done it. I know what it looks like.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy, a Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison.
Greetings, compadres. This is part 2 of Not My Circus, Not My Monkeys. Okay, so I'm going to I won't give a full recap. You'll just have to listen to the first part of this series. It's only 2 episodes, so I'm not sure why I'm calling it a series, but to get the background in the last episode, what I did was I went over basically making a comparison using a circus analogy to compare to my interpretation of some experiences. And I went over the different roles that circus workers, I'm calling them circus workers or circus folk, if you will, if you want to put a little Mike Myers twist on it. But that circus workers would possibly be in, right? So ringmaster or people associated with a circus, right? And so this could be about a church, an organization of any kind, a hospital or a school, but something that has kind of a religious banner over it, or a banner of health and welfare, welfare. And so anything that promises kind of to help, and just the different players and the different roles and the different things that can happen once you volunteer to be a little bit closer to that institution or organization and sort of see behind the curtain. So as I jump into part 2, I just wanted to quickly go over the 4 disclaimers on this piece before I jump in. So firstly, it's an interpretation of experiences. As I mentioned, it's the identifying characteristics of the individuals and institutions featured have been removed. Okay, so, and that's primarily to protect their privacy. So any metaphors and analogies that I use in this are to simulate a real life situation, but any assumptions made or conclusions drawn are simply those of the listener. Okay, so they should be treated purely as a coincidental happening, that you would hear something and think you sort of know on this podcast what or who I'm talking about. All right, so we're not going to go there because I have, for many reasons, right? But so basically, I'm just using an analogy to talk about what I've learned the past few months. And then second disclaimer is letting go of outcomes. So as I use this circus analogy, just keep in mind that this circus, if you will, is something that you're paying for. Okay, so you purchase tickets, you're a contributor with either finances, time, resources, whatever, when you volunteer. And so when you give in that capacity, you want to kind of have that spirit of like for fun and for free. So I want that to be assumed as I go through this. However, when you peer behind a curtain and you see what's back there from a different perspective, from the perspective of being a volunteer, sometimes it's not the outcome that you think it's going to be, and you realize you might have expectations that you attached to whatever institution it is. So everything is kind of like this, right? It's like turning a tapestry rug backwards. You see the back side of it and all the mess that's there. And so when I use this analogy of the circus and the circus workers, I'm not saying that all circus workers are bad. You know, anybody who works for any institution or organization that has a health and welfare or a religious component to it is evil or bad at all. There are wonderful people who work for these organizations, and then there are people who need shaping, and they really need to be mentored and have been told that no, you don't need that, it's going to cost too much or whatever. And, you know, then these people are sort of left rudderless and they're kind of figuring things out on their own. And that gives them a sense of sometimes false bravado. It causes them to at times be grandiose and sometimes display some really narcissistic qualities. And that's simply because a lot of these places can't afford coaching, professional coaching, not, you know, just like I'm going to watch a YouTube video coaching. And there are a lot of professionals on YouTube, by the way, just to let you know that I do know that. And I am not a professional at all of anything, just to make it clear. So again, these are my interpretations of my experiences based on things that I have personally learned about me and my experiences. Okay. Finally, last disclaimer is keep in mind, I often say this, but I never have enough information anyway to make a judgment about anybody else's life circumstance, situation, organization, or whatever. Again, this is my interpretation. So then I launched into talking about what it would be like as a volunteer to walk into a circus and be expecting a little bit, at least, to have a performance happen, but then you see a bunch of peanut shells down on the ground and you realize, oh, well, they don't look ready. So if a bunch of us pitch in and we start kind of sweeping up together, this will transform. And so being willing and expecting to do that for fun and for free, but then realizing that once you see behind the curtain, wow, right? That there are some really toxic and unhealthy things going on, and deciding whether or not that fits within the scope of your morals and ethics, and whether or not this is still a good fit for you to be at this circus, you and your acrobats, which is your students, your patients, if you're a patient advocate, or your kids, if you're in a church community group, or whatever it is that you want to substitute. So then we talked about the roles. So you have to go back and listen for that. So what I left you with was the danger of some of those roles taking on a different form. And the example I used was the ringmaster. I'm not sure, is it ringleader or ringmaster these days, but you get what I'm saying. The ringmaster, who is the person out front. Okay, so this is the pastor right? This is maybe a hospital administrator or a school administrator, somebody out front, right? Who maybe hasn't fully been trained or is maybe a little bit inexperienced or is maybe, and I'm not joking when I say this, I don't think this is funny when I say this, is perhaps on the autism spectrum and doesn't know it and has never been diagnosed, right? There are many different reasons why somebody would have no idea that they're not connecting, right, to their audience or to their circus workers or to their volunteers who are trying to sweep up these peanut shells off the ground and prepare for the show, right? So there are many reasons why. Or unfortunately, they could be a combination of ringmaster, illusionist, meaning they're going to just fake it till they make it. They're going to make it appear as if they have thought this through or appear as if they care about whatever it is that you may be talking about, or they're going to give you a bunch of like word salad BS that makes you think, oh, okay, they're thinking this through, when the reality is they're not at all, and they could care less, right? Because this is a paycheck for them, and or they think that they know more or they know better than you. And let's face it, people, feedback is not always welcome, which I'll get into, but later on when I talk about the cheap seats in the circus. But I know for me, if I am receiving feedback and I look at the source of the feedback and it's a negative feedback and I look at who is giving it, a lot of times I'm like, oh, yeah, that's telling. Okay. And so as a patron of the circus, sometimes if we volunteer down there on the floor to help clean up the mess, sometimes it's welcome and other times it's kind of not. And that depends on a lot of factors as well. But sometimes the ringmaster, perhaps, or somebody in charge will want things done a certain way, will want the help cleaning up the shells off the floor. But they also want you, keep in mind, you've paid for this. So they also want you to do it their way, and they're not open to feedback, which is a personal challenge of mine. I will tell you right now, this is true confession. I have a real problem with systems that are inefficient or that I think are inefficient, is kind of like the key caveat, right? Because there is so much that I don't see, right? Stressors, challenges, and probably tons of feedback that is the opposite of mine. Okay. And so people come at things obviously from different worldviews, different experiences, different lenses, different things that they've brought to the table, which is kind of the filter and the lens through which they see things. So when you have a ringmaster who is an illusionist, who wants to present a certain front, okay, but actually has a different motive, right? Has an agenda, but maybe will make it look or appear as if either they agree with you or they're siding with whatever it is that you're saying, but that's not at all what they think. That is really, it's terrifying, right? So it could be either one way. Either they're totally unself-aware, no self-awareness, or they just have certain agendas and they're super sneaky. Ringmasters who lie, who are prolific and pathological liars is specifically what I'm talking about. And that is unfortunate. If you find yourself in a situation where you encounter one of these individuals who is a ringmaster illusionist and a prolific pathological liar, that's really sad and scary. And you've like caught this person multiple times in lies. And that person doesn't recognize that as a lie, even when it's been pointed out to them that that was an untruth. Because sometimes people, they swallow that word better than, you know, if you just walk up and call somebody a liar, they're going to be really defensive, right? Okay. So that is the most dangerous version, right? Is the ringmaster who is also an illusionist. So in either case, the pretending or the lying, you realize essentially you're not in good hands is the point. So your longevity spending time under that circus tent will depend highly on how closely you need to associate with this ringmaster and how grossly or not grossly you are affected by this ringmaster and their choices and their behaviors. And, you know, I talk a lot of times about like zipping yourself up inside the suit, you know, that's going to protect you from being affected by these kinds of people where, you know, we have a choice on how much energy to give people, places, and things. And sort of, we also have this determination inside of us of what is worthy of our time and resources, right? And that can change. We absolutely have agency over changing our mind in these situations, right? And so in some cases with these ringmasters who are also illusionists, they will get, you know, you've heard this term before. If you've ever studied narcissism, you've heard the term winged monkeys, right? And it comes from the Wizard of Oz, that part where the winged monkeys are going out and doing bidding. That's where that term comes from. And so essentially what will happen is this ringmaster illusionist will get some other circus workers on board, or at least one, and sort of pair up with that one. And what those two will do is they will co-sign on each other's bullshit, if you will, so that a picture is painted. And this is all super manipulative behavior, by the way. It's actually less work to just go ahead and change and do the work, but that's another topic, right? But when they do have a calculated agenda or smoke and mirrors kind of image they want to present, sorry, that is the toilet in my room. My kids use my toilet. We have like a lot of bathrooms in this house. Mine apparently is the preferred toilet. I don't know. Just saying. And whoever it is, I hope I hear them wash their hands. Anyway, the thing is then you have, so you've got this ringmaster illusionist. Now, like you would think, well, why doesn't the tightrope walker figure out that this is going on? So the tightrope walker is the person, it's like the top boss, like the head of the ringmaster, right? The board, the board, the head of school, the lead pastor, pastor emeritus, or whatever the structure is of the organization, very top level. And that's for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because their vantage point is not privy to getting involved in the weeds sometimes and really noticing these things, because the scope of what those people have to do is so broad. And secondly, they know it's a pain in the butt to go through the hiring process of another ringmaster. It's a pain. So something has to be pretty egregious to get the attention, or perhaps they're uninterested and they don't really care. As long as it's not affecting the daily functions of the tightrope walker's life or things that will affect the tightrope walker, they could care less. And that's true as well. People have different reasons for doing different things. So if you've got a ringmaster and you've got this ringmaster who is an illusionist, either by design or just because they don't know what they're doing, because they don't have any self-awareness, if they team up with, and I'm looping back to that now, they team up with another circus worker, a pivotal circus worker, that could be the person who is a fire breather. Okay. So think about, for a minute, a fire breather at a circus. Okay. These are, the people who specialize in manipulating fire. They sometimes eat it, they juggle it, they perform all these tricks with it, and it looks really fancy at first, right? It's like, whoa, look at that. That's amazing, right? And their responsibilities are paramount in terms of safety. So they have to monitor closely the safety for themselves and the audience and the other circus workers, anybody assisting them, right? Anybody who they come into contact with. Perhaps it's the acrobatic aerialists or the students or the kids in the community group, right? Or the patients, right? Perhaps they come into contact with those guys, and most fire breathers do. And so those guys, safety is first. It's number one. It's top priority. Well, if you've got an illusionist ringmaster and you've got a fire breather who have now teamed up and they are co-signing on each other's bullshit, particularly so that they will still fly under the radar of the tightrope walkers, the people who are the top people in charge, right? That's just another level, right? It's another level, especially when those fire breathers are known to be the ones who will hide under the guise of like, I'm a mental health professional, or I'm, here to be the peacemaker or to sort all of the things out. And yet, the whole concept of this person is we want everybody to be heard and feel safe. But then that fire breather isn't doing the work. Let's unpack. So let's think about it again and I'll say it in kind of a different way. There's a wow factor to a fire breather, right? At first glance, it's like impressive, but fire is dangerous because there's so much at stake. So if you get burned, it's irreparable damage in most cases, and it causes scarring. So it's a really big deal. So in this fire breather job, safety is not only crucial for the fire breather to keep those who they come into contact with safe, but also, what is alarming is if you discover that this fire breather does not abide by his or her own safety guidelines and standards that they have set for others, that's petrifying. So how can I trust you, the fire breather, right, to be safe with me or with my kid or my patient or my student, right? if you refuse to be safe with yourself and you play the victim and you won't do the inner work because somehow you think you're terminally unique from the rest of us and you are exempt from doing the work because your situation was so much worse than anybody else's, right? No. So it's like a mental health worker who refuses to go to therapy. We'll talk it up. We'll totally promote it, but refuses to do the work themselves. What do you think about that? Well, I think after having some experiences, it's important to disengage immediately or pretty soon after you see what's going on. And I had this happen to me recently-ish, where my interactions where this fire breather and I were in contact originally were great. We had a friendship, right? And I falsely assumed this fire breather was doing their own safety work. No, I assumed that. And I assumed it because of the way that the fire breather spoke. Ooh, I can't believe I did that. I should have directly asked, but I never did, right? So we used to be really close to the point where something happened and I actually stood up for this fire breather when they were accused of not doing their job. And I shouldn't have done that. I made a mistake. First, I assumed that they were doing their inner work. Mistake number one. Mistake number two I made was I stood up for this fire breather, assuming I knew who they were. And as a result of that, guess what the fire breather started to do? The fire breather started to stonewall me. So this was unbelievably confusing to me at first, because I know that stonewalling is pretty much a narcissistic quality. And I had not at all considered that this fire breather could be a narcissist. It didn't cross my mind. And I am never to diagnose anybody else. I obviously am not credentialed to do so, nor, am I clear enough with behavioral patterns to do that. But I do know that because that's basically like narcissism, like psychology 101, right? So when this all occurred and I saw this fire breather go through this process, hello, my dear, I love you. I'll be done soon, love. Would you mind closing the door, please? Yeah. So when I started thinking about the stonewalling that this fire breather was doing to me, I was super confused at first, but I stood back and I sort of recognized, wait a minute, this seems a little bit familiar. And I knew that I hadn't been previously stonewalled by this person, but I knew that the person had previously stonewalled a circus worker, like a fellow circus worker. And I had heard the whole story about that. And while that person, did that for whatever reason they did that, the circus worker who was the stonewallee, the person who was being stonewalled, had actually shared with others why it happened according to the fire breather. This is later when they unpacked the whole situation and started like speaking again, but it was a long time. I'm talking like a year, maybe close to a year. And when I heard the like reasoning and how I get myself involved in these situations, I swear to God, I'm like, I don't even want to know anymore. It's like, I just don't even want to know. But anyway, the other circus worker was like, yeah, so this happened because I said something triggering to the fire breather and I didn't know it was triggering. And I thought, oh, geez. Like, I think at the time I assumed the best of the fire breather. And I just thought, well, there's got to be more to the story than the circus worker is saying. Like, there's got to be a real reason, and I gave the fire breather the benefit of the doubt instead of like politely detaching at that point. And I didn't get involved. Like, I didn't go and ask the fire breather about that specific circumstance, right? I just kind of took that information and like, compartmentalized it and was like, whatever, that sounds weird. This isn't my business. So when I realized that I was being stonewalled by this fire breather, and then I remembered that this is a pattern. There's now an established pattern of behavior. I realized it was time to detach from this person. And so I reached out to the fire breather, and we had this kind of relationship, this kind of friendship at the time. And I basically said, hey, I want to thank you for everything that you have added to my life. Because you know what? I don't hold anything against, like, I firmly believe the love and the joy that the friendship with that fire breather brought to my life. That's valid, right? It's valid. But I also then had the knowledge that that fire breather operated from a very interesting manual, a manual that clearly showed me that they are not caring for their own personal safety and not doing the inner work, because stonewalling is a tactic that is a manipulation tactic. It is to exert control over somebody. So it's like, I'm not going to speak to you. I'm going to give you the silent treatment to punish you. And at first of all, I'm sitting back here, for one, going, what the fuck did I do? Like, I didn't even do anything. Sadly, I regret it, but I stood up for you, when the reality was I had no evidence of why I should do that. I didn't have any evidence. I assumed that I knew the fire breather and that the fire breather was doing the inner work. No. So I detached myself from a friendship with this person, and the fire breather responded back. And do you know what the fire breather said? The fire breather said, oh, that's so nice. And I need time. And I know this must have been painful for you. No, not painful. Confusing. Yes, confusing. Because I just had never met somebody claiming to be a mental health professional who was not doing the work. Like, that was total cognitive dissonance for me. And so I was like, yeah, no, it wasn't painful, but go on. And the fire breather said, I just need time. And I hope that one of these days we can, have coffee and unpack all this. And I'm like, well, so no. And in fact, I have other family members who also had a relationship, a friendship with this fire breather. And thankfully, I have a close-knit family, a close-knit collection of kids. And we unpacked all of this. I mean, we talk about all this in the circle of trust. I shared with them every blow by blow between me and this fire breather, and what was happening, and how this, ringmaster illusionist was protecting the fire breather, and the fire breather was protecting the illusionist. And like, the toxicity that was happening there just was radiating, like you couldn't not see it, right? And so I talked to my family members about it, and I said, look, I don't want to get involved in your relationship with these people or this person, more specifically, this fire breather. But I want you to know what happened so that you have this information. And thankfully, my family is like, they're amazing. And they were like, oh, yeah, no, hell no. Like, Mom, if that fire breather is treating you like that, make no mistake, we'll be next. And we are not talking to that fire breather anymore. Like, friendships are over. We're done. And we've got your back no matter what. Like, no question. Oh, and I love that about them because they're just precious, and it's pretty incredible. So anyhow, this fire breather literally was thinking that they could string me along. And then when I reached out to them to say, this is the official goodbye, like, thank you for what you added to my life, that fire breather literally thought that they could just say to me, oh yeah, well, I'll let you know when we can go have coffee and talk about this. It's like, hey, newsflash, that's never happening. Take a good look at this face, because you ain't never going to see it again, because I value myself way too much these days. And I put my mental health as my top priority. So of course I can recognize, like, when you're not doing that. And the reason I can recognize that is because I didn't prioritize my mental health for so long when I was drinking. Like, my entire journey of recovery thus far, almost 13 years, has been treating my mental health every single day. So I know what it looks like to not be taking care of my mental health. And unfortunately, I feel like Mark Vicente coming out of the NXIVM sex cult. It's like, how could I assume this fire breather was doing the inner work? How could I make that assumption? How could I be that dumb? Like, and really, it has nothing to do with intelligence. It was that I had a connection with this person and I assumed the best. Did I have some red flags along the way looking back? A few, but I ignored them. And the same is true. People always say that. Like, Mark Vicente is famous for saying, nobody wakes up and joins a cult. Like, that's not how it happens. These people spin you into believing something about them that isn't true, or they manipulate you to the point where you're twisted up, man. And you can't really see because you don't operate in that unhealth anymore. And so you kind of assume that if someone is saying that they are healthy or presenting to be a certain way, you kind of just go, okay, well, we all have more growth to do. You kind of just do that. You kind of just give them the benefit of the doubt. But once I found it out and I had the evidence and I could see, and it was like, yeah, no, I am not going to be sitting around waiting for your phone call that you will now take me to coffee at some point and we will unpack this. No, never going to happen. I have far too much. I just care about myself these days. I used to hate myself, right? But I love myself now. And that's been a journey and a process of self-forgiveness to get here. And to that fire breather, it was like my attitude was like, you're not getting one more moment of my time ever, unless you want to own your side of the street and apologize. Because to this day, this fire breather has never done that, nor has the ringmaster. Right. And so, these people who don't do the inner work, they're incapable of seeing that they had anything to do with this. which sounds crazy, but a lot of people, they tout one thing and they do another. And I did that all the time when I was in my own brand of insanity, which was drinking. So if you have a fire breather in your life who thinks that they are calling all the shots, or a narcissist in your life who thinks that they can control you by stonewalling, and then deciding when it is appropriate from their vantage point to, not play the victim, and they're going to now go ahead and allow you to come in and, go to coffee with them or whatever. I'm not interested. Like, thanks, but no thanks. I am just backing away as fast as possible at that point. So that's what I have learned. And, there are a lot of things. There's a whole backstory to my friendship with this fire breather, reasons why I justified and excused some of their red flags, right? A whole backstory to it. But I'm not even going into that because, it is my fault. It is my fault that I didn't see it and I just assumed and I stood up for this person. It's like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And if I take that second chance with this fire breather and I submit to their bidding that they want to get together for coffee at some point, okay, and talk about this on their timeline, yeah, no, that'd be an example of shame on me. It's like the old Oprah line, when you know better, you do better. And so lastly, regarding these fire breathers, you've heard me say this many times. It's not my phrase, but it's one that's been around for years from different sources. And it's that hurting people hurt people. And I said this to the fire breather the last time I saw the fire breather in person, right? At my own, in my own setting. I said this to the fire breather because the fire breather was struggling and having a really hard time in their life. So I said it about somebody else, but now I'm saying it about that fire breather. And I know, again, because it's a mirror, I've done it. I know what it looks like. So this leads me to the cheap seats. And then I'm going to put it all together and finally end this whole thing. So I'm going to loop back to this, what I referred to earlier as the cheap seats. When you are in a particular position where your job is to be safe and healthy, so you're not going to walk around drenched in gasoline as a fire breather, one would hope, but it's not necessarily the case. But instead, what the fire breather in my life was doing was sitting in the cheap seats with popcorn, watching the rest of us sweep up the peanut shells and acting as if from time to time, they would be right there. They were going to help us, clean up the peanut shells, or they're doing the work, the inner work to be healthy. And then you find out they were just sitting up there in the cheap seats, munching on popcorn. Then I don't want anything to do with it, period. It's just too important. It is too important to lead by example, particularly in this area in life. And that is my opinion. And if you team up with an illusionist ringmaster, a ringmaster who is an illusionist and agenda-based smoke and mirrors illusionist, or somebody who's totally out to lunch and doesn't understand what's going on and is just hoping to position things enough so that they're not discovered to be totally inept, right? Because you guys are covering each other's backs, then I'm going to say thank you very much. And I'm going to take my seat in the audience and I'm not sweeping up any more peanut shells. I'm just going to sit back and watch the show unfold because more is always revealed. More on that in a second. So putting it all together. So looping back to the Wizard of Oz, which I mentioned when I was talking about the winged monkeys, right? That fly off to do the narcissist bidding. If you've seen The Wizard of Oz, I was in the play, some of my kids were in the play. You know that behind the curtain is a little man pushing buttons and pulling levers, creating a big, scary show, right? Big, entertaining show, but it's smoke and mirrors, and it comes from a place of fear. How would I know that? I would know that because I have done that myself. It is the small dog barking loudly at the big German Shepherd, right? So these guys, I want to just say, are circus workers, okay? And I'm not saying that to be negative or condescending. I'm saying that they can't give me what they don't have. They can't give me what they don't have. So if they don't do the inner work and they don't have that level of honesty that we all struggle with as humans, being selfish, self-centered, having shady motives. But the difference is course correcting. The most important lesson that I've taken from this entire situation with this circus and from just things that have occurred over the past few years in relation to this circus is that circus workers are not doing anything directly to me personally or to the other patrons at the circus personally, or to the acrobatic aerialists who are doing all the tricks, or to anybody else. They're just circus workers, you know? They have a limited perspective on life. And I say this with all empathy. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying I am better than anybody else on the planet. I just have been at such a rock bottom in my life that I had to do the work. I had to. Okay. And I was taken to do the work, kicking and screaming until I got really into it. And now I'm obsessed with it, right? But these circus workers, they're under a freaking tent, for Pete's sake. They're under a freaking tent. Their world, their bubble is very small. It's just small. And the beauty of being a patron, somebody paying for this circus, is that being a volunteer and pointing out the piles of poop under the peanut shells and choosing to pick up the broom or not and help out, or to just go sit in the audience. Those are all my choices, and I can leave at any time. And three things when I'm putting this all together. First, I'm not special. So they won't care if the tent door hits me in the ass on the way out. And they won't care if I leave the peanut shells all over the floor and do nothing, because somebody else will come along who loves the circus and they will volunteer to sweep up all those peanut shells. There's nothing special about the way that I do the peanut shells. Volunteers have been doing this kind of stuff for decades, trying to make things better, right? And nothing changes when nothing changes. And so that's why there are always peanut shells there for somebody to pick up, right? Because nothing changes. And until those circus workers get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and pain becomes the great motivator for change, they'll just do what they've always done. And it'll be how it's always been, year after year after year. And so they'll have more volunteers come in and pick up a broom with varying degrees of success. And, those volunteers will go, how come the people before us didn't do this? And it's like, we tried, but they wanted to micromanage the way we swept up the shelves. And they just dumped more on before we could get the ground totally cleared in the first place. And so it's all in what the circus workers will allow and not allow. And this is the experience they want to provide their patrons. Not the website experience, right? the real deal experience, And so I'm not special. Secondly, the circus has to provide the tools. So sometimes there aren't enough brooms for all the volunteers, and sometimes they won't even allow volunteers to use the brooms, and they expect those volunteers to pick up the peanut shells with their bare hands and throw them away. And there's nothing special about any of us except what we will allow and the boundaries that we will set up and enforce in our lives or not enforce, right? So I'm just another person under the tent, keeping in mind I'm not special, who has paid to be there, who has the free will to choose to volunteer and sit out on the front lines and sweep up those shells, or sit in the audience and watch the show. I have the free will to leave. It's that simple. So I'm not special. The circus has to provide the tools. And then that links to the scope and the quality of the work. So if I'm doing work for you, especially if I'm a patron, and you really should be the one cleaning up the shells, okay? Then you don't get to tell me how to do it. I'm happy to work collaboratively. I'm happy for us to work alongside each other, but you're not going to sit there and boss me around and micromanage how I'm cleaning up the shells and whether or not it's done to your satisfaction, right? I mean, I'm not your puppet. You're not paying me. I paid you, right? So, hey, circus workers, grab a broom yourself and let's do this together. Like, let's truly have a partnership if that's what you're going to tout that you have with volunteers who are also paying patrons. So in conclusion, if you have a situation like this in your life, I would dispense a piece of advice that I don't generally believe in dispensing advice at all, but I would say something to consider is sit back, grab a bag of popcorn and watch the show. So you get to just sit and watch the circus. And when you realize, especially after being one of those people who's been sweating on the floor, sweeping up peanut shells to somebody else's desire and liking, when you realize this is just a show and those circus workers are just human beings, it helps so much. It just takes the air, the tension right out of this stagnant tent environment. And you just feel like you're outdoors in a meadow. It's suddenly from your seat, suddenly so refreshing because you see what a spectacular production the whole thing really is. And it becomes almost funny to see people try to insert themselves into roles that they're really not supposed to be in. Sometimes they attempt crazy feats, manipulative feats. I mean, you really don't know why people are doing what they're doing, but sometimes they give it away. And when that happens, it's like, oh my gosh, right? I mean, they will have grandiose tricks of the eye that are nothing more than magical bullshit, right? And they want to make it appear as if they're doing amazing things. But it's as if your aerial acrobat comes out and sits next to you in the audience and goes, wow, look at all that the circus workers are doing. Look at that trick, the magic. Oh my gosh. And you turn to that kid and you say, you know what, honey? It's not real. Because when you stand back and look at it from a macro vantage point and perspective, you can see it for what it really is. And then you get to make your choices on whether or not to stay under that circus tent. And that depends on various factors, such as, does the good outweigh the bad? And this is your basic like risk versus benefit. You can ask yourself, how strong are our family bonds that, we can call some of this out in the privacy of our own home and work it out right? And examine it and see it for what it really is. If you have that circle of trust in your family, like I'm lucky to, you can ask yourself, what amount of BS from the circus workers is going to be tolerated by me and what is not? And P.S., this is a variable question, right? Depending on various other factors, like, the children that you have with you there at the circus. Are they benefiting? Are they being harmed in some way by it? And so all in all, you get to ask yourself, is this circus a good fit for my situation, for my family, for me to be contributing to financially or with time and resources? Is it worthy of my contributions? Or is it costing me more than money? Is it costing me my family or my very soul even? And how involved do I want to be? And that's variable too. Do I want to be on the floor cleaning up the peanut shells and community building? Sometimes yes. And it depends on a lot of things, right? Or is it better for me to be in the audience on this one? And for me right now, the answer to that question is it is not costing us our very souls, because we don't get that close anymore. We are safely sitting in the audience eating popcorn at this moment, my family and I. So we have surrendered the parts of the circus that are toxic. I am very particular about my time on the floor of the circus these days. Very particular, and I choose what I commit to very selectively. Whereas before it was like, oh, whatever you want done. Oh, however you want it done. No, not anymore. So if you've done the work and you have that trusted tribe of support network at home, it helps to have these conversations with our kids, because you blow the whistle and you put all the pieces together and you just kind of sit back and you just go, I'm going to wait this out. I'm going to watch this great unfolding, because at times it's pretty comical. It's pretty comical. And ultimately, is this the right fit? Is it still the right fit? And you can ask that as often as you need to. There are no rules. And as you leave that tent, or as you stay in that tent, remember that outside of that bubble of the tent, the community that you have built in there with fellow clowns and with your acrobatic aerialists, your kids, those are bonds that are lifelong, and they're way bigger than a tent. They're way bigger than this little bubble where they want to call all the shots and make all these crazy rules, inefficient rules that actually don't matter or matter too much to the well-being and safety of the patrons, right? So those bonds surpass all of that. Your world is way bigger than a circus. Not my circus, not my monkeys. So as always, be kind, rewind. Thank you for the honor of your time. Take what you like and leave the rest behind.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy, a mum of eight's journey from jail to joy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. You can keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @AmyLizHarrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.